Welcome to Chapter 4. In this chapter, we're going to discuss the workforce, jobs, and job analysis. By the end of this chapter, you should be able to explain how the workforce is changing into unpredicted ways, identify components of the workflow analysis, define job design, and identify common approaches to it, and discuss how flexible work arrangements are linked to our work-life balancing efforts, describe job analysis and the stages in the process, list the components of job descriptions. We create a workforce profile that looks at the participation rate of our labor force, and that's the percentage of the population that is working actively or seeking work. There are certain elements that are factored into this. We look at the age and generation groups, skills gaps, improving the amount of people and the level in which people are ready to work, and any shortages that individuals have in their skill set. Figure 4.3 is looking at that profile, and you see that this was a comparison between the year 2000 and the year 2010, where at least the applicants had a high school diploma. That rate was 84% in 2000. It jumped to 10 years later, a mere 3% at 87%. Those with at least a bachelor's degree, 26% in 2000 compared to, a bump of 4% in 2010. So at least 30% of applicants in the workforce had at least a bachelor's degree. It'll be interesting to see those numbers in about 2 years or so. When we then factor in those with a bachelor's degree based on race and ethnicity, in the age group of 25 and older in 2010, we see that 52% of Asians had a bachelor's degree that were ages 25 and older. Non-Hispanic whites came in second, 33%. Blacks, which includes African Americans and anyone of African descent, falls under 20%. Hispanics at 14%. Then you break this down and you look at the highest level, ages 25 and older, of their educational, and you look at the profile, how much time was spent in graduate school, but they hadn't received their advanced degree yet, right? They didn't receive that MBA or doctorate degrees, 4%. 29% have the diploma, 9% have associate degree, 15% bachelor's degree, 11% have an advanced degree, 15% no high school diploma, 17% they attended some college but they never earned their degree. We look at the nature of work based on the work itself, which is any effort that we direct towards achieving some kind of goal. The job was where we can be able to group any kind of task and duties that will then encompass a assignment for work for a particular employee. We analyze the workflow by looking at the inputs and outputs and the activities that are taken and how those move throughout the organization. We then take those ideas and those factor into then what becomes the output, what comes from it. So we have our input, material, information, data, our equipment, our people, and all their experiences, and all that is plugged into what is required to get the job done. And then from that is what we get the output. And then we are able to measure the quantity and the quality of that work from that standpoint. Job design and redesign looks at how we organize those tasks and duties in order to influence performance, affect the satisfaction of the employee on the job, how it impacts their mental and physical satisfaction, if they're drained, if they're mentally stimulated or not. And then there's sometimes where you need to redesign the job, where you're changing it in different ways to improve upon them. That can be including technology, it could be slimming things down, it could be allowing for telecommuting opportunities, so on and so forth. There are characteristics of the job and of people. Management can control the job characteristics. You cannot easily control the characteristics of the people that do the job. When we look at tasks, stress, tools, working conditions, management can control that. What you may not necessarily be able to easily control is someone being honest, their intelligence level, their energy level, if they're motivated or not, and any physical characteristics that they possess, for instance. We have our different types of employees, full-time, part-time, independent contractors, which also can fall under contingent workers. Temporary workers, which also falls under contingent workers. The contingent workers are not full-time employees. They're temporary, they're part-time for a specific period of time and type of work. That can, and let me back up really quick, because that can be something where you have someone that goes out on maternity leave, paternity leave, someone that had surgery, someone that, is sick for an extended period of time, and you have someone come in on a temporary basis to help out. Now, person job fit. This is very important because a lot of times people just put bodies in positions and there's not a good fit. You need to be able to match the characteristics of the people with the characteristics of the job. But I will even say a step further than that. It's not just matching them with the job, but it's also matching them with the culture of the organization. Because someone can be a good fit on paper, but let's say the culture of the organization is very entrepreneurial and you kind of got to get in where you fit in. Well, just because you can do the job doesn't mean that you also align with the culture of that job. So to me, it's like a three-pronged one, not just the two. But it's based on looking at those characteristics and then the things that are unchangeable components of that job, the things that just are a given. It's a routine. And knowing that people will differ on what they consider a good job or a bad job, right? Everyone's not on the same page as to what you would deem a good job versus what I would deem a good job. And so making sure there's a good fit for that. If a person does not like the mundane, you don't then give them a position that does. If a person doesn't like repetition, you don't give them a position that's going to have them doing the same thing over and over. If there's a person that doesn't like working in a cubicle, then don't hire them for that position. If there's a person that doesn't like working outdoors, don't hire them for the position. It's not a good fit, right? We then have these different approaches to job design. We have job enlargement, where you broaden that scope, where you expand and include different tasks to make the job even more comprehensive. Job enrichment is where you're adding different responsibilities and allowing for that person to be more involved in the functions of management, which include planning, organizing, controlling. And or possibly even evaluating the job. And so it allows that job to have greater depth and for someone to actually feel more engaged and part of something. Job rotation is where you're going to be able to shift from one job to another, allowing you to have more variety. Then speaking of variety, we have skill variety, where you have to be able to have several activities for successful completion, where you're being able to show the varied sides of you and the depth of your abilities to do multiple things in a above average or average way. Task identity allows you to identify a unit of work that's carried from start to finish and that is specific to that particular job. And then, of course, the impact that the job has on you is significance. How much significance does it have on you and on other people, both internally and externally? Then we have autonomy and feedback. How much freedom and control and discretion do you have over your task, your job, your assignment, in the scheduling of work that you perform? If you have none, then you have little to no autonomy. If you have extensive or free, then you have full autonomy. And so that has to always be measured and outlined so that employer and employee understand how much freedom and discretion there is. Feedback is your ability to not only receive information as to how well or poorly you did on a job or task, but there should also be ability for you to provide feedback on how you feel about that performance as well. Looking at the model, you can see the enriched jobs, any psychological states, and the desired outcome, which is always motivation, performance, and satisfaction. And you can see how those are funneled in. There are special types of teams. We have a special purpose team that addresses specific problems. They're going to work on enhancing overall quality of a product or service. A self-directed team, they basically are going to be assigned to do a set task, duty, responsibilities, and that's what they're going to be laser focused on. They have this particular project or whatever that they're going to be focused on, and they're in that group to do that, and they literally direct themselves throughout that process. Then you have your virtual teams, which working within an online or hybrid class is the same thing as a virtual team. You're separated geographically, or you're working from home, but you're linked by some kind of technological software program or online system that allows you to communicate with the rest of your team. Of course, as we increase global operations and expand our companies, we also increase the amount of virtual teams that we have in play. And sometimes you never get to physically meet your other team members face to face, right? Sometimes it may only be during an annual whatever event. Sometimes you just can only connect through seeing each other online. Interesting enough that the issues that come up with the tasks that need to be performed, as well as who is responsible for those tasks, it's important that HR and managers work together to make sure that those are clearly addressed, and understanding that the virtual team is very difficult to manage because everyone is spread all over the place, and you don't necessarily have the synergy of working within an office with the entire team. And so this can be a very large burden on the employees, but also on the managers, because oftentimes virtual teams are overlooked because they're not there. You don't see them. And so you have to make that presence be felt. I know that I have a virtual team that for my companies, and it can be very difficult because when we don't see each other on a regular basis, you may forget that you haven't checked in with one of your team members, or they haven't checked in with you, or, oh my gosh, I haven't remembered to type a message in our online, our intranet, so on and so forth. So it can be a burden. So it's being mindful of all of those things. Some of the benefits of having work teams is your productivity can improve tremendously. Involvement by employees can also increase. You can enhance the trust level of your coworkers. There's greater learning of individuals and greater diversity that is then you can pull it in through the knowledge set, the skills, that people possess, as well as the various abilities. And you can then have this great soup or gumbo of a wealth of knowledge and skills that are available to you. Telework. Um, this is where you complete your work through electronic interactions, internet technology. Basically, it's telecommuting. You're working um, all or most or some of your time at home or wherever you have an internet connection, right? Um, Based on this publication, they show that 24% of Americans work at least some hours at home each week. There are some advantages and disadvantages, of course. Advantages are you're spending less money going out on gas, lunches. You're saving time commuting. You seemingly are more satisfied. Disadvantages are you're socially isolated. You could be possibly working more hours than you would in the work if you were actually in an office. Teams can have very low performance. There's a lack of work-home boundaries. Why? Because especially if you have family in your home, they oftentimes don't respect the fact that you're in work time and because you're at home. So to them, they feel like, well, you're not working, you're here. So there can be that. There can be a big role conflict between work and family because of that as well. There's a need for greater flexibility in scheduling work, shift work, creating compressed work week where you create the work schedule where it's accomplished in fewer than 5 8-hour days. So you may create a 3-day work week or 4-day work week, and you may have it where it's 8 hours or 10 hours or whatever, but you're compressing the time down. Creating part-time schedules versus having full-time. Allowing 2 employees to do the same job of one full-time person, so they share the job. And then, of course, flex time, where the time is flexibly created to allow for various factors. Where we consider allowing you to cover the workload, but without the same traditional 8 to 5, 9 to 5, 40-hour work is breaking the traditional and making things more flexible and amenable for your employees, taking consideration so many different factors. We have to think about the work-life balance. We talk about it in chapter 3. And the fact is that creating, or is it chapter 2 or 3? Creating programs that can help create that seeming balance between your work requirements and obligations and those that are in your home life to help reduce those conflicts, to improve your ability to recruit and retain employees, and keeping people that really do want that flexibility. To have that sense, when you have employees who feel like there's a greater work-life balance, you usually also have healthier employees. You have people that are taking less time off from work, they're going to the doctor less because they're healthy, they're getting more sleep, they're getting more rest, they're exercising, they're spending more time doing things that enjoy them, so on and so forth. We have to be able to analyze our jobs in order to see the requirements that are in front of us, what we need, the context and context of the content and context of those jobs. And it helps us when we're doing our planning, when we're recruiting and hiring employees, to see what the job really, really entails. Not what it just says on paper, what we came up with, 5 years ago. But what does this job really entail? And so we can have accurate information that also allows us to make sure that we're compliant with EEO guidelines and laws, to make sure that we're not just saying that this is what the job does, but it actually does it. This helps when we're talking about compensation, with bonuses, with promotions, training, and types of performance appraisals. So we have some methods and sources of data, and then, of course, we look at who conducts the analysis. When we have the questionnaires, interviews, observations, logs, and diaries, And this can all come from our supervisors, managers, analysts. And we can have an outside consultant, a supervisor, manager, or an HR job analyst perform this analysis. It's used to create or develop either the description or the specification that we then use into any of these categories right here, which can include selection, employee labor relations, so on. So we break things up in HR based on, for the job analysis, based on either the unit of the HR team or managers. HR team will coordinate the analysis of the job. They'll write the descriptions and specifications that managers need to be able to review. They'll review those descriptions and make sure that the input they receive from managers, that they review those for accuracy. They'll seek out assistance from outside experts for any types of analysis that is deemed unusual or difficult. Managers are there to make sure they complete or help complete the analysis information, review those descriptions, make sure they maintain accuracy, request any new analyses as the jobs change, use it to help identify performance standards and provide information to outside experts. We break down the analysis based on our task, which allows us to identify specific work activities based on duty to help us comprise those tasks that are performed by specific individuals, and then the obligations that we have in order to perform those tasks within a specific job are the responsibilities. Then we look at our competencies, and that's our ability to actually get the job done, to perform at a level that is at the standard or above the standards. And there we look at our technical and behavioral competencies, which we talked about in a previous chapter. We then identify which characteristics that make employees most successful in that job and how we can influence job performance in the future. The stages of this process include planning the analysis, preparing and introducing the analysis, actually conducting it, developing the various job descriptions and specifications, and then make sure that we stay on top of maintaining and updating them for future, making sure we're reviewing them. Some of the ways that we go about that is through work sampling, employee diary log. That's part of the observation. Interviewing employees. That's one of the best ways, because you can then follow up with any questions that you have. Doing a questionnaire of either the job or the managerial. They're good as far as quantitative, right? You get that numbers you can crunch, but sometimes if you need the follow-up, it can be difficult, especially if you did a random selection or you don't specifically identify the individuals who are participating in that questionnaire. Sometimes it could be time consuming because you're having to then go back for follow-up. Sometimes people can see the interview process is very extensive because it's qualitative. It's going to require you to have some pre-written questions and be able to elaborate on those, or to go down a different path whenever an employee mentions something that may not be aligned with what you have on your question sheet. Some areas that could be covered through the questionnaire can be focused on specific duties and time spent, the contact with other people, any dimensions that are tied to the physical demands and working conditions, supervision, what decisions were made, and any characteristics of the person holding the job. ONET is a database that has about 800 more occupations that are classified and distinguished based on industry. That also includes the relevance, frequency of specific tasks, the abilities and work experience and education of those that would be holding the positions, any kind of job zones, work styles and values and interests. And all of this is useful for employers that want to look at specific jobs. This is something the Department of Labor has created. The current focus is on core duties and necessary knowledge, skills, and abilities. Being mindful that everyone is really getting on this high horse of coming up with these fancy jobs and job titles. And with the inflation of these, what you can have is an inability to actually align the job and job title with what the industry provides. And so when you have a, some kind of creative title, and then you're saying, well, what does this job entail? And what does it align to most in the traditional realm of, job titles or positions? It can be very complicated, especially if, okay, well, now this job floats into some of the other, traditional roles that we see in the industry. So there can be some issues with that. Then we have concerns with employees' fears, and of course the influence of the job incumbent and managerial straitjacket, right? We're going to that. Where you actually, and you can also call it a managerial handcuffs. Um, so ADA, we have a job analysis that are aligned with that, where we can identify the job functions, not marginal functions, but the essential job functions that are very clear, that make sure that there's no discrimination against anyone with disabilities, and looking at making sure that we're compliant with the standards of labor, and where it deals with how much employees are being paid hourly, and by the job. There are fundamental duties of the job that we have to take consideration, and there's some that are also not incidental or ancillary to the purpose and nature of the job. Those are what you call marginal job functions. And when you're looking at the difference between essential and marginal, is the things that separate the two are the amount of time, the percentage of time that you spend on task, how frequently those tasks are performed, and how important they actually are. That is how you'll determine whether or not something is essential or whether or not it's marginal. Then we look at the job description. That's where most people are well aware of. They know that you saw a job posting, and that's what you applied for, and usually that's what is then referenced in your interview. It's going to identify the tasks, the duties, and responsibilities, and that's what you're focused on. As we talked about in the previous chapter, you break that down. HR is focused on then having to break that down to make sure that that employee, that candidate, has the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities in order to perform the job at a satisfactory level. And then you have to create standards in which the job has been performed at a acceptable level, and how it was performed, and then the repeat ability to perform at that same level becomes the standard. Now, you can always have someone who performs way above that standard. So if the standard is 50 widgets and you have someone who performs consistently at 75, the ability to then get others to reach that same level then can become the new standard. If the standard is 50 and someone is consistently performing at 25, that person needs to either be retrained or redirected to another position, or if that's not feasible, of course, released from the job altogether. Then, of course, the identification of the job is the title, the department in which you're working, what relationships you're having, who you're reporting to, one or more people you're reporting to, the specific location and date of the analysis that it was performed. And then you look at the general responsibilities and components of that job, and how that then becomes the overview for the general summary of what that job entails. We talk about the essential job functions, and they have to be listed in order of importance. What functions, what duties are required for this job, and and where do they rank in order of importance from most important to least. Then, of course, we have our KSAs that are tied to the job specifications, any education and experience that the person has or is required, any physical requirements, and or working conditions. If you're going to be working in blizzard conditions, right? If you're going to be working in the water, whatever, all of those things have to be factored in. And then you have to be able to provide any kind of legal disclaimers and then, of course, there has to be an approval. So the senior, whoever the senior leader is that's responsible for that has to approve of all of this and sign off on it. There has to be ability and flexibility to allow an employer to change the job descriptions as needed. So with that, that is chapter 4. If you have any other questions, if you need me to elaborate more on something, please email me. Thank you.